did you get into the Sasquatch Bigfoot mystery, and how long have you been involved in research?
Right. Well, quite some time. Like you, it was at a young age. I was in fifth grade. I was living in Spokane, Washington at the time, and it happened to be the location of the premier U.S. showing to the public of the Patterson-Gimlin film, his documentary showcasing the footage from Bluff Creek. And the advertisements showed up in the paper, and I think the article, the Argosy article, had already come out and had been picked up by, had appeared also a condensed version in Reader's Digest, but I hadn't tapped into that yet at that time, and so this was total news to me, and kids at school were abuzz about it, talking about it, and raced home that evening, and sure enough, there was the advertisement, and convinced my dad to take my brother and I to the Spokane Coliseum for the showing, and boy, the hook was set. I mean, I was even at that age, I was very into science and biology, especially, and human evolution, anthropology, physical anthropology, and so on. And so this was just amazing. We just embodied all the interests that were percolating, and one thing led to another, and I started reading and collecting and articles and whatnot, and what you can do at that age and at that time before the internet,
right.
Even before photocopy machines. When you couldn't photocopy a magazine article, you had to
right.
You had to either dictate it into a little cassette recorder, which I did. I had a whole box of cassettes where I had literally dictated chapters of books and newspaper articles and different things like that. Recorded the soundtracks from drive-in movie theaters of the movies that were all the rage at that time. The Legend of Boggy Creek,
right.
and Creature from the Black Lake,
right.
and that's so I would listen to these things actually at night when I was getting ready for when I'd go to bed. I'd turn my tape recorder on, plop in one of these cassettes, and listen to these things and fall asleep. it was that obsessive. Anyway, but that interest waxed and waned over the years. Eventually, I did end up pursuing a career in anthropology and anatomy, and was researching postcranial anatomy of humans and non-human primates and our hominin ancestors, and looking in the fossil record, and particularly the morphology of the foot as it related to bipedalism, and so I was in an extraordinary position compared to most when I had the opportunity to examine an exceptional example of a set of footprints in the Blue Mountains just outside of Walla Walla, Washington, back in 1996, and
right.
And that was probably the principal catalyst. There were a couple of events that the interest waxed and waned over the years in between, but that's what really pivoted, provided a pivot, and launched me into the professional pursuit of the question. And I struck up correspondence again with Dr. Krantz, and had the opportunity to go up and visit him in his lab and see the casts, many of the casts. Most of his collection were copies. Okay. He would replicate them and mold them and replicate them and return the originals to the owners.
That's correct.
And so he had a significant collection. But then I got on one of those occasions, on that initial occasion, when returning home, my brother and I were traveling together and paid a surprise visit to Paul Freeman and Wes Summerlin, and got to see Paul's original cast material.
Oh, wow.
And there's just something about the originals. Where it actually, they include the duff and dirt, and
right.
There's just almost an animation that's present in the original versus the even very good quality replicas, and it was quite stunning. And I was pointing out anatomical details and just mentioning or drawing attention to various aspects of the anatomy, morphology, and Freeman, who was was an accomplished outdoorsman. I mean, he knew animal sign, and he knew
Right.
had some tracking skills and so forth. But he didn't have the technical understanding that most trackers don't, and even acclaimed man trackers. And sometimes they make mistakes in their assessments because of that. They get beyond their wheelhouse, and Joel Harden comes to mind because of the association with the tracks in the Blue Mountains, and some of the statements that he made simply revealed that he had no knowledge of non-human hominoid or hominin footprints. And the very things that he was having problems with were the distinctions I would expect to see in a non-human footprint like that attributed to Sasquatch. And that has been borne out time and time again with multiple completely independent examples. So he was just, everything was through the lens of a man tracker. And so where it deviated from a human trackway, then he was suspicious and thought it was a hoax.
Oh, okay.
And, when you read the criteria by which he negates the tracks that Freeman had identified, every one of them is exactly aligned with my subsequent model of the Sasquatch foot derived from a study of hundreds of footprints. So that was,
Okay.
Anyway, so Paul was, shooting right over his head. He didn't know what I was talking about. He clearly didn't know what I was talking about. Dealing with students all the time, I have a good sense of when it clicks with a student and when it doesn't.
Right.
And you get that. You sometimes get that.
Deer in the headlights look.
Metaphor.
Yeah.
Yeah, or that metaphorical dog cocking of the head.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
And anyway, that was kind of what really did it. I sat there looking at these. I mean, I'd just been to Krantz's lab and was really kind of overwhelmed by what I had seen there. I had studied his book.
Right.
I knew the examples that were offered there, but it's something altogether different to actually see the footprints.
For sure.
And for he and I to have the luxury of laying these things out in series on the tabletop and looking at the entire collection from one location and see that what at first seemed like a haphazard random collection was actually just a variable expression of a very limited number of individuals, and you could very quickly put them each in individual bins and see that you weren't dealing with just a hodgepodge of spurious, independent examples, but these were quite consistent representation of the variation in appearance of tracks under different conditions and circumstances of just a few individuals.
Right.
That was impressive. And then to actually see these tracks in the ground, fresh tracks that were so fresh that I could observe dramatiglyphics in some of them.
Like dermal ridges and stuff like that.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And not to mention all the signs of animation, the pressure ridges and tension cracks and drag-ins and comet tails and, splaying of the toes and curling of the toes and flexing, extending, and so forth. It was, it made literally the hair stood on my neck as that realization sinks in that, my gosh, the Sasquatch really did walk by here last night. It was just that clear, and no escaping it. So that's how it got started. That was in 1996. So it's been 24-ish,
24,
25
years.
years.
Yeah, that's pretty good. All right.
And,
sorry about that. So that basically answered my second question as well. Like, when did you really first realize it was real? And you pretty much just answered it. It was those tracks in the ground that were like, and that's. I mean, I'll email them to you as well. I caution it's. I think I may have found a Sasquatch track last summer when my girlfriend and I were coming home from a trip to Jasper, Alberta. We found them just outside of Valemont, BC. Now, like again, I will email you all the pictures that I have and stuff. I believe it was a faint track. I believe 3 to 5 days old. It rained previously before, and it was in kind of soft, sandy, clayish type material. And I'll email you the story and whatnot, and send you all the pictures, and I'll let you look at it. I mean, it's faint. Like it said, I estimate it to be 3 to 5 days old, but basically it was found just off Highway 1, which is Highway 16, Yellowhead Highway, which is the main highway going west and east all through Canada. And it was found on the Riverside rest area just outside of Valemount, BC, and it looked like to me that it went down there to possibly take a drink from the river and go back up to this game trail that was across the highway. Now, I walked the highway, couldn't go walking across the highway because there was lots of cars going through, but my estimation is it happened in the evening hours. But anyways, I'll send you the story and the pictures, and I'll get you to look at it, because it is. I just let people know it's a faint track. It looks to me, I can see what I think are toe impressions. I think it could be a young to adolescent one, but I will let you be the judge, so I will make sure I get those to you. So, what advice do you have for a young Sasquatch researcher such as myself? Kind of like, what I should be careful of, who should I follow, like what kind of, make sure I don't fall into like any certain like traps or kind of get taken advantage of, that kind of thing.
Well, the first thing is to, if you have the opportunity to work in an area that's fairly accessible to you. Okay. Because, regardless of all the other stuff that's taking place in the quote-unquote community or online or whatever, what you're really going to, where you're going to potentially make a contribution or really experience the investigation is to get out there and do it yourself. Right. And so that requires that you spend time. Yes. And so when people are always telling me, well, what's a hotspot? Well, the best thing to do is, hotspots are artificial. They're artifactual. Right. Because, a report requires not only that there be a Sasquatch, but there has to be a person to encounter the Sasquatch or the sign or the trace. And so when you look at a map and you see the distribution of incidents, of reports, that's not, it's biased by human population distribution. And so basically what you're looking at is, in my opinion, more often than not, or you're looking around the edges of where Sasquatch reside. Oh, and right. That, so anyway, but the point is, if you can find an area that is adjacent, so you can spend right. your free time readily getting back, because again, it's a bit of a numbers game. Yes. These creatures, I'm convinced, are so rare and so dispersed because of their solitary behavior, and I've experienced or witnessed zero good evidence of any larger group than a female with maybe with a couple of offspring in tow, or occasionally maybe during her receptive periods at times when there's a consort male. But I see no evidence of nuclear families or social units that would indicate, a nuclear family or a more extended social structure. And so they're so dispersed and so far-ranging in their habitat. We've got evidence that suggests that they have a home range on the order of about 1,000 square miles. So that's a lot of territory to cover, and so it's like, just as an example, I've been working in the field with a gentleman, and this gentleman is a former VP of a major corporation, and he was the vice president of facilities. So whenever there was a new building, a new office center or whatever, he was the project manager basically. And so this is a guy who he's used to. When you have the resource, you have an objective. You need the resources, you need the personnel, you need the financing, and then you get it done. It gets done. Right. So he approached his interest in Sasquatch in the same way, and so he got some people that had expertise. You know, he had a professional cameraman and sound man to document everything we did. He came and visited me in my lab, and he invited me to consult with the project, and he had some other people. And then, of course, we often networked with local investigators in areas where we thought we might be good to work in the field and bring some tools to bear. And then he had the financing, he had the resources, and all the bells and whistles up to a certain point. I mean, within reason, but he had a significant budget. And at one time we were on one of our outings. We were going to explore an area up in central Idaho that I was keenly interested in, and he wanted to do something in Idaho. But anyway, when he picks me up, I jump in the front seat. I'm there, and we're driving off, and so he's getting the conversation rolling, and he says, "So, Jeff, what are our chances?"
Oh, jeez.
And I looked at him and I said, "Well, Gary, you've got to keep this in mind. We can have all these accoutrements. We can have all these toys or equipment, all this tools, better said, than tools at our disposal, and we can go up there and we can have used all the logic and rationale in choosing a location with ideal conditions for tracking and visibility, et cetera, and habitat and resources. And if that Sasquatch, that one or maybe two Sasquatch, aren't in that particular drainage right now, and instead of over the ridge of the adjacent drainage that we're not going to go to, it's all for naught. I mean, well, it's not for naught, but I mean, nothing's going to happen. We may find some old footprints, or we may find an old nest or whatever. But I said, this is why no one has been successful so far. and people forget that. When you hear stories, so there's one of your red flags, what you should watch out for. Anybody who claims to go out on a weekly basis to their quote-unquote location, their hotspot, and has activity, quote-unquote activity, there's a big red flag. Okay. Because I can guarantee you that the activity that they're describing, when put under the glass, so to speak, is nothing. Okay. I mean, I've been there and done that. We've gone out with people, because in choosing locations, he put this fellow I was working with, and still I'm working with. We're going out again this fall, or late summer. But he puts, for some time, he kept putting the onerous on me to select a location. And he had a couple of that he really liked. I mean, he kept unfortunately going off in my opinion, wild goose chases down in Florida and so forth, and spent a lot of resources getting there, and et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that's a kind of a sore point. But my point is, I've done a lot of talking with and interacting with local investigators, and we've chosen some of those based on their claims of finding prints and finding hair and vocalizations and taking baits and all these different things. And when you sit and scrutinize them, we were with, I won't mention a name right now, but
that's fine.
It was in the Rocky Mountains, in the Intermountain West, and a fellow who laid claim to having long-standing, and I mean to the point where he was claiming familiarity with multiple clans that he could differentiate.
I think I know who you're talking about.
Well, anyway, and so we went down there, and it's the first place in particular was marvelous habitat.
Okay.
The other area was a little bit more arid than I really thought was.
Okay.
I mean, it made some parts of our job a lot easier, but it was it was ponderosa pine, lodgepole pine, whereas the other place was primarily blue spruce or Douglas fir, not blue spruce, Douglas fir forest, and really rich and moist and productive. Lots of animal sign and lots of berries in the understory and so forth. Anyway, but the point was, there was all this talk there'd be mention of finding footprints in the dusty road that were so clear you could see the creases in the foot and between the toes.
Oh, okay.
I said, where's the pictures of these? Well, they're filed away, and he can't find them. He could never produce the really stunning footprints that he had always describing.
Okay.
He brought in hair samples, and I bring out my field microscope, and we right there sat down and mounted them and put them under the microscope. And I showed them, well, look, here's the guidebook, and it's a rabbit. This one's a deer. This one's a coyote. None of these are primate hair. They're all fur. They're guard hairs of fur-bearing animals. And then, what else? We looked at some other. Oh, he had some recorded vocalizations. There was one he got while we were there. Oh, they were so excited, because these things were always coming up to their tents and pushing on the tent or reaching under the tent wall. They were these big canvas wall tents and expedition tents. But they had this recording they got one night. They were camp. We had two separate campgrounds just so we could up the chances of something, disturbing or visiting.
Makes sense.
Well, he plays it back. They got it on recorded. Well, he plays it back, and it was a cow elk. And I just had to Google, and get an example online, and it was clear that it was an elk, And so I said, well, how many of these other experiences that you've described are just, pine cones falling on the roof of the tent, or an elk coming up and rubbing against the canvas? It just didn't. I felt bad, but
right.
When they left, I told him. I said, well, at one point, I said, look, take out your absolute. I said, go. They were going home for the weekend. We were staying for another week, but we were gonna. They had to go home and take care of business. And I said, while you're home, if you've got some time, you've been telling me about all this. Go through your boxes, your files, but bring me the best example of a footprint that you've got, that you've seen. Because he's been doing this for 20 plus years. Okay. Best example. I said, bring me your best, the hair that you found under the most convincing of circumstances, and bring me then, if you have any recordings, the best recording or whatever. And so he did, and and he brought a bunch of other stuff. He just brought these whole boxes, and we were, sticking thumb drives in the computer. We had a projector in our little headquarters, our little lab on wheels, and we had it projected on the wall. And we were looking at all these different things, and one after another just evaporated under scrutiny. And I said, I'm sorry, but I said, there's just nothing to work with here. There's just nothing. You're jumping to conclusions, and he had a real knack for. He would go from a very subjective experience, and then from that he would extrapolate, start making all these declarative statements about what Sasquatch do and what they must be thinking, and how they're. It's just, and I said, you got to be more scientific about it. Anyway,
I don't really get into all that stuff. I just kind of stick to the facts and kind of just look at it and research it and.
Well, that's right.
Yeah, and just kind of see.
Well, and that's what you should do.
You come up with my own kind of conclusions and just keep my mouth shut.
Well, right. But even on a personal level, it's important that you don't allow yourself to make assumptions, to jump to conclusions. I mean, these guys, every bump in the night, every tree that falls in the forest is attributable back to Sasquatch.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, these creatures are so rare, the chances of you having an experience are extremely slim. And so the first thing you have to do is to before you can, if there's not direct evidence, before you can ever make an assumption, you have to first eliminate all the much more common, likely explanations for what you experienced. I mean, this is where the principle of parsimony comes in. Parsimony is so often misused, Occam's razor. When people state it that the simplest explanation is most likely to be true, that's not what Occam said at all. And that's a total misapplication of the principle. The principle, the philosophers of science, which is a bit constrained, a bit rigid, but nevertheless, what they're adhering to is the notion that science can't through investigation, you can't examine every possible example. So it's impossible to completely prove your hypothesis. But it's not, one might expect that if there are exceptions, if your hypothesis is wrong, there's going to be exceptions to it, to what you've tried to describe, the relationship. And so if you can find just one exception, then that falsifies your hypothesis and you're forced to modify it, to elaborate perhaps a little bit, to accommodate that exception or to account for the exception. So what it says is, it says basically, Occam said, you shouldn't unnecessarily add factors to your explanation. Right. You shouldn't unnecessarily multiply factors or add factors. Meaning, don't jump
to conclusions right away.
Exactly. Exactly. So you start off with the simplest explanation because that's the most straightforward to knock the legs out from under. And if you can, then you're justified in moving forward. So if you find an overturned stone, in other words, and there happened to be bear in that area, the bear outnumber the Sasquatch probably 100 to 1. And bear are known to and have been seen frequently turning over stones to find what's underneath them. Yeah, then unless you can demonstrate something to us. See, this is the problem I have with all these stick structures and supposed glyphs and all the other, and wood knocks even. No one has evidence of Sasquatch associated with them. Right. No one has ever observed someone wrapping a stick against a tree trunk, Sasquatch wrapping a stick. And so it's purely assumption.
Right.
And so in the absence of that associative evidence, is it much more likely that, that stick structure is a blown over tree, or is a hunter making a tripod to dress out a deer, or a Boy Scout making a shelter to wrap a tarp around,
Right.
And all those things have been demonstrated. So,
no, it makes sense.
So anyway, back to your original question.
No, that's okay.
I always tell people to really get familiar with their own territory, know the animals, know the animal sign, know the resources, where's the water, what are the drainage patterns, are there berries, where are the food items, where are the sugars, where are the carbohydrates, what elevation in your area does tree lichen grow, which is probably an important, and that's a bit of an assumption, but so many animals, including humans, utilize edible tree lichens, the black tree lichen as a carbohydrate source. It's a fallback carbohydrate source that in wintertime, an animal that's not, and we don't know if they hibernate or not, but animals that don't often fall back, deer and elk, and primates. I mean, it's not, we don't have to even just resort to distantly related species. In areas where primates occupy high elevations or cold climates, like in China and northern Japan, they eat this same lichen that we have evidence that, or indications that, because of by association, that Sasquatch are relying upon as well.
Cool. Right,
so with that familiarity, you get the time.
Yeah,
now, as far as, if you have questions about individual personalities, I'm happy to give a little brief opinion. Try not to spend too much time on it because it can be a quicksand.
I kind of, like I said, I've been into this since I was 7 years old, so I've heard of Ivan Marks. I've heard of, these certain people that have kind of been put into the Bigfoot world as the quote-unquote, they're the fakers, don't listen to, no. So, whatever. I even talked to Mr. Peter Byrne yesterday, or on Saturday, and he said, really, there's about kind of 6 of them out there, really. He said, he basically said, he basically said, you'll kind of get an idea of what is kind of who the fakers are and who hoaxers are and who aren't. I kind of just took his word for his value.
You can have a sense of what they're claiming, what people who then start to, take, for example, Matthew Johnson, just as an example. Someone who claims to be the Sasquatch Messiah, who's here to usher in the new age where Sasquatch eventually or already are coming through. He knows them by name. He communicates, through portals. He knows them by name. He's communicating with them telepathically, mentally. Anyone who's claiming stuff like that, okay, I guess I'm not one to, those who live in glass houses shouldn't be throwing stones, but if you're going about this subject seriously and scientifically, again, it comes back to Occam's razor.
Right.
Is it reasonable to jump to such an extraordinary explanation? Not that it can't be true, that it's not possible, or it's any less well, I shouldn't even see even that sort of is an affront to say that it's not less likely to be true. But logically, it's no less likely to be true, I guess. But by strict principles of logic, but by common sense and everyday experience, when you can account for so much, if not all, I think all, of the anatomies and behaviors of Sasquatch, by analogy to human or non-human hominoid primates, why would you have to jump? Why would there be this exception of an animal that bears so much resemblance to other primates?
That's right.
And yet is so different.
Right.
Is so different. I mean, if this creature from this other dimension has evolved to look exactly like a primate, to have a foot that has 5 toes that behave just like a primate's, that has all these other. I think Dr. Bindernagel did such a marvelous job with his book very early on.
Yes, I did talk to him too. He was one of the first guys that I really talked to, and he pointed me in the direction of Mr. John Green and talking to him and stuff. And that was like 10 years ago. So when he passed away, I was really heartbroken, and because I never got the opportunity to meet him. So, and that's why it's so important for me to, when I got a chance to talk to Mr. Byrne and really say, hey man, like you really, there's got to be more people, that I really admire you and all the work. And I did mention your name and there's got to be more people into this and that's why I feel the original 4 Horsemen, I feel like I owe it to them to have someone that, really does this properly and really does this seriously and doesn't just do this as a quick money grab type thing, Right. I really admire those guys, and I have books you've wrote right on my bookshelf I'm looking at, and and it's, I'm not really into the goal of writing a book per se, but I'm just I'm kind of like the original 4, gathering reports, trying. My area to me would be anywhere from Jasper, Banff, Alberta, that area, that just kind of sticking close to home, because Mr. Byrne kind of told me, it's kind of hard to, in the old days, somebody would report a sighting and they'd run over there and drive like Mr. Byrne said he used to drive like 500 miles to get to a sighting. Well, that's, that's kind of, I've heard that's kind of not the way to do it nowadays. It's kind of just stick close to, if you're in an area or kind of close to home, which is what my plan is. So.
Yeah, so much data has been accumulated to this point,
right?
And the problem is too. It's this question of there aren't. How do you gauge the priority, the justification to go to such lengths? I mean, back then when Peter was doing that, there wasn't the internet, and if someone had an experience and over a phone conversation, this person was describing things that he would have no way of knowing short of having had a personal experience. Nowadays, people, what they see dramatized on television or read about on exhaustive databases on the internet and so forth. I mean, anybody could describe something that you'd have no way to, unless there's evidence to corroborate it. And that's the key. Right. See, that's the thing. And I have learned, this has been, I just finished reviewing a paper which talks about the role of eyewitness testimony, and specifically in the topic of Sasquatch. And for a long time, the skeptics have always heaped it on the Bigfoot investigators that all the scientific evidence suggests that eyewitness testimony is very unreliable. They point to all the criminal cases that have been overturned with DNA, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But there also has been more recent studies that have shown that in reality, When you're not talking about a criminal case where there might even be other motivations to lie or to embellish or to distort that you have to deal with, there actually is a lot of reliable information. Right. But the problem is I have learned, let's take as a counter or as a parallel analog, footprint discoveries, footprint descriptions or reports. Right. So you see all these accounts of people encountering oversized human footprints. And yet, when I have followed through on those reports where there are photographs or casts to substantiate the claim to discovery, I find that in many instances, they're unreliable. The descriptions are unreliable. Okay. And so with that in mind, where does that leave you with the eyewitness testimony? So unless there's multiple witnesses, unless there's substantiation through footprints or trace evidence physical evidence like hair, or other forms of trace evidence like nests or scat, you have to really take everything with a grain of salt, especially if they're not trained observers or experienced observers. I mean, it's one thing if Joe Blow's driving down the road and sees something run across the road in front of the car versus a professional wildlife biologist or a fish and game officer or a veterinarian or somebody like that who has an experience. I mean, that's a whole different quality of it. Right. But, I've just learned through experience that you just can't, it's not that you can't trust people as being reliable, but that their perception, their powers of observation, and their susceptibility to suggestion or expectation. People see what they expect to see.
Or see what they want to see, kind of thing.
Yep. Uh-huh.
Yeah,
one person described it, you've heard the adage, seeing is believing. Well, the inverse of that is true as well. Believing is seeing. Right. In other words, we're prone to see what we expect or what our belief system is anticipating. And so it's tough. Quite honestly, I just because I'm limited in time and resources, I don't have the wherewithal either to jump in the truck and go driving 500 miles. Right. And I find it's just not worth it. Okay. And there are other people who do that. And the BFRO, for example, has its curators, and there are people who may not be good in the woods, but they're good investigators talking to eyewitnesses and at least documenting that evidence, so I leave that to them.
Sounds good.
And I would much rather spend my time and resources out in the field doing firsthand.
Fair enough. All right, well, I just got a couple other questions here before I let you go. I don't want to take up much of your time. I'll just kind of put them two at a time here. Number one, what are your thoughts or feelings on the Patterson film? And number two, what do you think of the 1969 Bosberg footprints, kind of two expertise of yours?
Sure, yep. The Patterson-Gimlin film, I'm 99.99% confident. I'm as confident as I can be, short of having stood there on the sandbar and witnessed it, that it's the real deal. The footprints are themselves alone compelling, but combined with the visual record of the footprint maker, there's just no question in my mind that it's the real deal. And that's borne out through multiple people who are expert in costume design, people who are expert in anatomy and biomechanics and kinematics, people who have had ample experience observing great apes and primates and people, observing their anatomy on all levels, from surface to the underlying musculoskeletal anatomy. So I'm quite convinced, and of course I know Bob Gimlin personally. We're good friends.
I got a chance to talk to him about 10 years ago, and I tried to get an interview him just recently, but that's kind of a hard thing to do right now. So,
These days, yeah.
Yeah, so
Russell Acorn's kind of shepherding him pretty tightly.
Yeah, that's why I kind of backed off on that. I felt a little intimidated, so I just kind of was like, okay.
Yeah, well, there's so many venues, so many formats that one can hear him discuss or repeat the account. That it's not the same as doing it in person. I agree, but I mean it's him in his own words and
I kind of just came up to the conclusions like, okay, I don't have to pay for an interview to know something that I know is already real.
Oh, he tried to charge you? Okay.
Yeah. That's why I felt intimidated. I kind of was telling him my story, kind of like, hey man, like I'm just I have a part-time job at a retail store in Canada, and I'm just doing this, this isn't for like a big TV production. This isn't going on radio. This is just for my personal research. And so I just kind of, as you could say, put my head down and just walked backwards and kind of just left it. And there was no animosity or anything. It was just kind of,
no. And you can appreciate too that someone in his position, he has to have a filter of some kind. I mean, if you go to a conference where he's there, you'll have a chance to visit with him or chat with him. I mean, maybe not one-on-one, not with unlimited time, but I mean, the poor guy. I mean, I'm the same way too. I get so many requests for people to come and visit the lab, for example. I could be doing that almost all day, every day, if I said yes to every request. And so you have to, at some point, you have to kind of put a filter on it. So I can appreciate where Russell, though, I mean, he's got another motivation as well, and he's he's trying to help out Bob too.
I agree.
Bob has gotten the short straw.
That's what I'm learning myself right now. Is in the last few days, is kind of like, okay, this was not the nice and rosy story that I've been hearing all my life on TV and in books. So with that,
in what way?
Just apparently how he got ripped off, basically.
Yes, yes. Oh yeah, no.
I never knew that happened until a few days ago. So I totally get why Mr. Accorda is helping him out. I absolutely get it. But at the same time, I kind of thought, hey, look, man, I'm just a really amateur kid here, a researcher trying to get back into this thing. I really don't feel like I should be asked to be paid $200 to $250. So I just kind of, I kind of just put my head down, didn't look in the eye, and backed away slowly, and just kind of thanked him for his time. And I just kind of agreed, hey, if I'm in the area, Yakima, whatever, let's touch base, and we'll do it that way.
Yeah.
So I didn't. He was kind of trying to drive home. Hey, look, Bob drives like 100 miles to get to my house, and blah 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 to do interviews, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to make the poor guy drive 100 miles. And I'm kind of finding out why he doesn't do video or interviews at his house. So I kind of got that story told by other people, which I absolutely totally, I get it. But at the same time, it's like, hey, look, man, I'm just like John Green starting out in the 50s and 60s, right? I'm not Mr. Moneybags here. So, but that's why I really appreciate you letting me talk to you, because I've seen you around TV as a kid and reading your Sasquatch Meat Science book, and so it's like when I talked to Peter Byrne, like I was just shaking. I was in awe. Like, here's a guy I've watched on TV as a 7-year-old, and it's like, holy cow! Like he's finally and I absolutely totally appreciate you guys letting me talk to you just for even the amount of time. I mean, if I ever meet you, that'd be awesome. But with me living in Canada. But anyways, just my final question, I guess, to ask you, since you're in the field, I guess it's a two-parter. What will it take for Sasquatch to be proven without a doubt to be real? And do we or should a Sasquatch be killed to prove it's real? Or could we just hopefully get some DNA evidence or a body found?
Right. Well, now the first one was what would it take?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think, the precedent, the standard response in zoology to establish the existence of a new species is the procurement of a type specimen, which means either an entire corpse or a diagnostic portion, a jaw, tooth, something that was quite distinctive. And now, as far as the kill or no kill attitude or philosophy, I'm squarely now I say, because when I first started into this, I, after much mental wrestling and rationalization, adopted Dr. Krantz's stance that the only way this was ever going to be resolved is if a specimen was procured by whatever means. And as he suggested, the first person should be lauded as a hero and be rewarded, and the second person should be criminalized and thrown in prison and fined, because it should become illegal immediately upon recognition. Yeah. And so, but then I hit a point where I could no longer justify that rationalization, and I did an about face, and it was adopted the position that the best way was to approach it from DNA. Yeah. If we could demonstrate a novel DNA sequence of a non-human primate out there in the woods in North America, and even though there is no precedent, there honestly is no precedent for recognizing a new species, and there's some disinformation out there about what is and isn't, but there is a lot of discussion, especially in the conservation literature, that we've reached a point where, especially in the instance of rare and endangered species, especially large-bodied animals like this, where the taking of an individual specimen could have dramatic impact on the social structure of a population in an area. That it was justified to resort to a voucher DNA specimen that could be independently, established and verified. So that's the position that I've adopted, and ever since then, whenever we've been in the field, we've employed techniques to try to collect hair, skin, or blood, through snags or snares.
My thought, my dad always said, I really wouldn't want to be the guy that shoots and kills it, because what if you shoot and kill it and there's the last one?
Well, that too, yeah.
And the other thing is,
if it's the last one, it's a bit of a moot point, because
that's true. And I remember I remember Krantz saying the same thing. Well, if it's the last one, right? And what I've kind of noticed with them,
if it's one of two, then that's the real criminal.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing I've kind of noticed as far as patterns go, and I noticed this even as a kid, and I could totally be wrong, John Green and I think Byrne and DeHinden were kind of non-kill, while Krantz and Green were kind of, let's go out there, let's shoot one, let's get a specimen. But what I kind of noticed, as these guys got older, like in their younger days, they were like non-kill. No, we'll find one this way, that way, whatever. There's no need to kill one. But as they got older and maybe starting to feel a bit more pressure and really wanting to, quote-unquote, win the battle, maybe they kind of changed their tune and be like, let's go shoot one.
Well, I think that was part of it. I don't know in John's case. John was in part a reaction, I believe, to his strong conviction that these were apes.
Right.
These were, they were non-human.
Right.
And they weren't closely related to us. They only resembled us in the fact that they stood upright. And with that, I agree 100%. They may have a little more brain power than living great apes, but not much. I think the closest analogy might be something like a Paranthropus, a robust Australopithecine. It has a cranial capacity that's only about 50 cc's bigger than a chimp or a gorilla, relatively speaking. And so, they are essentially walking bipedal apes, in other words. Those early Australopithecines. And so I think John kind of reacted to that. Grover just was, he recognized that the science, and he was so jaded too, especially as you point out in his later years, by the total rejection of his very scientific approach to the subject. That he thought, well, then if that's what it takes to convince science, then that's what we need to do.
Right.
Now Peter, on the other hand, I don't know if early on he was
a big game hunter.
Big game hunter. Yeah. And he's and I think he's probably changed his tune a little. He's much more conservation.
Yes,
but see, that's what I'm sometimes people list with the political wins, and in the 60s and 70s, it was all tree huggers and save the rainforests, and so he started toting around a tranquilizing dart gun rifle.
Correct.
Well, you press him on that. I don't know if you did, but
no, I
you
never.
Talk to any veterinarian, and the only way to work out dosages on an animal is to establish that in captivity, and you can't just assume something like ketamine or whatever that's being used on other non-human primates, and then the dosages are rather specific. They're not very forgiving. How do you and when animal of the size of a Sasquatch, if you old enough to remember, Mutual Omaha's Wild Kingdom when they were darting animals, the big game animals out there on the Serengeti, how did they dart them? They drove up alongside them and poked them, or shot them from 10 feet away, or they flew over with a helicopter and shot downward, because that dart, delivering that dart from a distance, is a real challenge because of the weight. You can't have too much velocity, or you'll injure the animal, but you have to arc this dart into this big animal. So anyway, the point is, how do you preload? How do you anticipate for encountering the Sasquatch? What weight do you estimate? And you're not going to have time to swap out or to pick one particular cartridge and load it. And so the chance, anyone who was carrying a rifle that was loaded, the only way to have success would be to overdose.
Right.
And that's going to be hard to deliver at first in a thick understory vegetation and all the obstacles. If you could get close enough to shoot it, and then if you did deliver it, chances are you're going to kill it if you do bring it down. Otherwise, it's not going to phase it. And so you say, "Oops, that's too bad." It's just it was kind of. Peter and I don't know if he said nice things about me or not, or didn't say anything.
I didn't really bring anybody specific up. I just strictly asked him kind of for some advice. Really, I was kind of.
I see.
That's why I kind of was asked that question earlier. Like, hey, like, just so I don't tick anybody off in this world, so I don't get shunned right off the gate.
No.
Here's that's.
I don't.
Yeah, I kind of.
I don't hold.
Sorry.
No, I don't hold grudges, and I don't. But unfortunately, Peter and I have not had a good working relationship because of. It's mostly the resistance has come on from his side.
Oh, okay.
And but I've unfortunately too. There have been times when, it's too involved. But it's gone back and forth a little bit. But Peter has been a little bit of a. While he is quite charismatic, and he has put a very exotic and flamboyant face on the search, the adventure of it. He's a bit of a cardboard cutout. He's done some serious work, and I was actually surprised. The one time we actually had an opportunity to sit down one-on-one over a breakfast, we were both in the same hotel for an event, and we agreed to meet together for breakfast, and that was the first time I was able to see that side of him, because he's never shared that with me. You would think when a young scientist who also kind of idolized him, put his reputation and career on the line, that there would be a little more enthusiasm and cooperation and potential for collaboration, and it wasn't that at all. His demeanor and his language and body mannerisms and so forth was all threatened. He was threatened by someone who actually had credentials, see? And so, unfortunately, we got off onto a very bad start, and it just went downhill. It went up and down from there, depending on what he needed. If there was something that where I could offer, then he would reach out. I mean, one time it was, I've been fairly successful because of the serious and objective way I've approached this of attracting funding from philanthropists and foundations who are interested in seeing that work go forward. And he got wind of that and asked me for contact information. Well, that's a little, that's like asking where your favorite fishing hole is, And I was a little reluctant, but I thought I would be the bigger man. And so I said, well, I suppose I could point you in the direction. I said, but you know that person is going to come right back to me for an opinion.
Right.
And in order for me to offer an opinion, I would need to know what you're planning to ask and what your proposal is. I said, so completely professional, completely confidential at the time, of review. If you'll share your proposal with me, and just so I have an idea of what you're asking for. So he said, oh, that's fine. He said, give me a couple of weeks to polish it a little bit, and I'll send it to you. Well, he had a couple of friends, some of his older mates that he hung out with and had done research in the past. And so basically he sent the thing, and there was absolutely nothing new. There was no innovation, it was the same exact stuff that we've been doing for decades. And then this huge Christmas list, shopping list, 4-wheel drive vehicles for all three of them each, a stipend for the three of them for 3 years. They wanted, tranquilizing rifles. They wanted thermal imagers. They wanted night vision cameras. They wanted this. They wanted that. I mean, it was thousands, tens of thousands of dollars of equipment and so forth. I'm thinking, well, why should you? You're honestly, you should be sitting on a porch somewhere. Quite honestly, at this age. I mean, because he's not able to go out in the field that much at that time when he was this is not that long ago anyway. But I just very politely explained that perception or that perspective to him. And I said, you're not, and then on top of that, while that request came to me, he had just published his trilogy book. I don't know if you've seen it, where he talks about his adventures with the Yeti, the Loch Ness Monster, with Robert Hines and Bigfoot.
Okay.
And in that thing, he had a whole section on the Blue Mountains outside of Walla Walla, where I had this experience with Paul Freeman and have had multiple experiences and footprint finds and evidence since then.
Right.
And of course, much of Grover Krantz's book is pivots on the evidence from the Blue Mountains.
That would be big footprints, right? Krantz's book? Yeah, I have that. Yeah, I got to get into that. Yeah. So
it's excellent.
Yeah.
And I mean, he has some opinions, but that are a little off, but there have been, or that could be modified with updated information.
Right.
But anyway, the point was, in that book, there's this section, about 3 paragraphs, where he talks about the blues. See, and he did go there. He went there at one time, and he looked at some of Paul Freeman's stuff and whatnot, and he wrote it all off as hoax.
He told me the Bossberg thing were blatant fakes.
Oh yeah. Well, here, we didn't talk about the Bossbergs. Let me come back to that in just a minute.
No
well, the Bossberg's way up north.
Yeah.
The Bossberg's not in the blues.
No.
But he called them all hoax, and then he said it's really curious because he said the habitat in the blues is an area where you might expect there to be Sasquatch, but there is absolutely no credible evidence that they are there. Well, the footprint evidence, the evidence out of the blues, Freeman's video, which ranks right up there, I think, as number 2 or 3.
Yeah, I agree.
All the footprints, which have been examined by more PhDs than evidence from any other place on this planet.
Right.
and yet he decides that they're all hoax. So when I talked to him about his proposal, there were two main issues. Three issues. One was the extravagant budget, and two, but more importantly, more fundamentally, was the fact that he offered no evidence of innovative techniques, other than the same things that have been done over and over and over again.
Okay.
And three, he just published this book where he poo-pooed what is probably the most compelling evidence examined by more PhDs than anywhere else, which leaves no confidence in his ability to ascertain or to evaluate any evidence that he might stumble upon, on the off chance when he was out there. So we haven't spoken since that time. But let me tell you about the Bosberg really quick. See, now here's one that gives you almost all the insight that you need, but it's one of several. Let me preface that. I was invited speaker at Massachusetts General Hospital to the podiatry unit, part of their lecture series, and I spoke about the footprint evidence of Sasquatch, and I showcased this pathological example. And here, to a room full, 50 some plus experts in podiatry from the hospital and from the community, as well as a few orthopedic surgeons who came in out of curiosity. But I could talk very technical shop with this audience, and they were fascinated by this. In fact, I left a pair of replica casts of the Bosberg footprints with the department chair, and he has them on display in the department office.
Neat.
Yeah, but I was contacted one time by a cousin of mine, a distant cousin, second cousin. We had met just briefly once at college, and then he saw me on television, one of these documentaries. He went on and became an orthopedic surgeon and was in his residency, and when he saw this thing on television, he took the opportunity to call me, to look me up, and called me, and said how interesting this was. And I said, well, this is great. I said, I'm fascinated to learn, where your career is taking you. And I said, can I ask a favor? I've always wanted to have an orthopedist take a look at a particular case. And I said, I won't tell you too much about it now, but I'll let you look at it when just fresh.
Right.
So I had a picture print, a nice black and white print of a very clear photo of the originals. It's one that's been published. Very excellent one. It has a yardstick laying both up and down and crosswise.
Yeah, I'm looking at that one right now.
Yeah. So I sent him that picture with no other qualifiers or anything, and just wanted his reaction to it. Well, he immediately called me back upon receiving it, and he said, "This is fascinating." He said, the healthy foot looks quite normal. He said, except the heel is really large and broad. But he said the deformity is classic example of a category called pes cavus, and we discussed that a little bit. I didn't quite agree, even though deferring to his expertise. Pes cavus has a little different expression in it. It's more within the umbrella of skew foot. But he said, the point is, he said, if I was presented with a patient with this condition, unilateral like this, one side only, I would rule out, it would almost certainly rule out a congenital birth defect, because that's almost always on both sides, expressed on both feet. He said, but this could be either a crushing injury, a healed crushed foot, a rock fell on his, foot or whatever, or a pathology of the spinal cord, a spinal cord lesion that causes a neuropathy that results in deformity and shrinkage of connective tissue and hypertrophy of other soft tissues and so forth. He said, if I had such a patient, I would immediately refer to them for an MRI study of the spinal cord, the lower spinal cord. He said, and then he said, when and where these casts were made, could you check, it's a small town, could you check with the local hospital? This is back before the FERPA laws and everything, and you could, or HIPAA, I guess it was HIPAA with medicine, isn't it?
Right.
And you could FERPA for the grades, school grades, and so forth. But anyway, the point was, he said you could check and see if there was someone who had a spinal cord lesion combined with a foot deformity. And I said, his name was Russell. I said, Russell, I might be able to do that. I mean, it might be possible, but I said, you do realize the guy would have to have 17.5-inch long feet.
Right.
And there was this pregnant silence on the other end of the line, and then he goes, oh, that's right. I mean, he was so taken with the anatomy that he overlooked the scale.
Right.
And he goes, that's right. Yep. So anyway, we laughed and talked about that, and then it was interesting because sometime later, several months later, I get a call, and Russell was, like I said, was doing an internship, a rotation, a residency.
Okay.
At this, and his supervising physician was actually the foot expert. Russell was focusing primarily on knee and hip replacements. Anyway, I get a call from his attending physician, and he introduced himself, and he said how interesting this was, and Russell had shared it with him when he got back. He'd been out of town, and we talked for about an hour about all the real nitty-gritty interpretations of what it could be, and what the likelihood that it was, a pathology of the spinal cord or something like that. And anyway, but the closing statement told it all. He said, I hope you don't mind, but I kind of imposed on Russell, and he gave me this photo that you shared with him. He said, I had it framed, and it hangs in my office, and every several months when I get a new set of interns coming through on rotations, this is the first case I have them evaluate.
Wow.
So
interesting.
So those things that example held up under close scrutiny and discussion to a room full of professional podiatrists and orthopedic surgeons. It held up under discussion with a professional foot specialist who also then is so impressed with it. See, he's not encumbered by what the implications of it are.
Right.
See,
so he has no horse in the race.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And therefore no bias against it. It can't be true, therefore it must be false.
Right.
And so how did they hoax it? So they must have hoaxed it some way or another. And so even though unfortunately Ivan Marks is the fly in the ointment, and people like John Green and Peter Byrne, because of their interaction with those people on the scene at that time, they came away with a bad taste in their mouth about it. Let either one of them explain how that was faked.
Right.
How thousands of footprints were laid down in snow and mud, and even underwater.
Oh, yeah, I did not know that.
How they got to the opposite side of the reservoir to a gated, fenced, restricted access area, which the investigators, got permission to go in and found where it came out of the reservoir on the far side.
Right.
Found more tracks over there. That holds up under scrutiny. David Daglin suggests that all you have to do is go to a medical library and pull out an orthopedic textbook and trace an example of skew foot, and you've got it. Well, you don't. You don't. The differences in skeletal proportion agree exactly with my model of the foot skeleton based on the kinematics associated with the flat, flexible foot, and the evidence of the mid-tarsal break and mid-pressure, mid-tarsal pressure ridges and such. They agree exactly. Krantz, unfortunately, got all kinds of, flack for one misstatement. Basically, and it wasn't really a misstatement, in describing the proportions of the foot, drawing attention to the elongated heel, which was necessary because of the flexibility in the midfoot in order to increase leverage with increased body mass. He made the statement that the ankle was translated forward. Well, that's not the best way to say it. It is forward relative to the length of the foot, the overall, proportions of the foot. But the better way to say it is, and then people would argue you could not know where the position of the ankle from a footprint. Dageland has been adamant you cannot infer any skeletal proportion based on a footprint, and that's just flat wrong. And I've said it's wrong, and I've confirmed that with dozens of other people, including radiologists. I mean, I can take a radiograph of a foot where you can still see the halo of the soft tissue, and I can show you all the correlations with joint positions and surface anatomy, flexion creases and convex. The most convex point of the ball of the foot, both on the medial lateral side. The curvature of the heel corresponds to the position of the heel bone. The deepest points of the pressure are under the points of contact of the calcaneal tuberosity, and so forth and so forth. I mean, those things are said. Yeah. They're obvious to anyone who. That's right. There's an experiment that we could do, but they tightened up on me. We were going to have students, allow to have a footprint or X-ray taken, and also a series of footprints made, and then do this double-blind test where you would infer the positions of the joints from the footprints of known students, labeled tracks, but were are coded tracks, and then compare the margins of error with the actual positions of those landmarks on the foot skeleton on a weight-bearing X-ray of the foot. But unfortunately, our radiology department here, they're not allowed to actually X-ray human subjects. Okay. They can only do models and things for teaching, and so that project went out the window. But I mean, it's straightforward. Yeah. You don't even really have to do it. You can.
I can look at that foot and go, that's not normal. That to me looks like an injury.
Oh yeah, that.
Yeah.
But the point is, if Grover had just simply said, instead of the ankle being translated forward, if he had just said that this increased mass required a greater heel length, a trend which is evident if you look at apes of increasing body mass, from a gibbon to a chimp to a lowland gorilla to a mountain gorilla, you see an ever-increasing relative length of the calcaneus to increase that power arm of the lever. And the Sasquatch just extends that same trend to the degree necessary for the increased body mass that it possesses relative to the other great apes. That would have avoided a lot of unfortunate contention. But So anyway, Dave Dagelin is one whose writings you have to take with a very you don't take his writings. Put it that way. Okay. I mean, when I reviewed his book, there wasn't a page that didn't have a problem on it. Not a single page in that entire book. And when I wrote a book review, I was asked to write a book review for the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. It was 18 pages long, the review. And the editor said, I can't publish this. He said, it's got to be maybe 3,000 words, and that's it. Just a couple pages. And he said, I would have to have him respond. I said, well, go ahead, have him respond. I said, the problem is you cannot write a review unless you just say the whole thing is BS, because there's not a single page that doesn't have a query on it. Right. I go through it, and I went through it quite methodically. It got published, though, in another journal. I happened to mention it to another editor, and he goes, oh, we'll take it. We love long reviews. And he said, and so they published it in its entirety, so it's published. But every single, there's so many problems in it, and it's just unfortunate. It's sad.
Yeah, for sure. One quick thing before I go. I kind of saw it, I watch it quite a bit to get somewhat of a chuckle out of it and some sort of, information out of it. There's a video on YouTube, a 1996 lecture from Rene DeHinden, and he's going after Krantz, and you step in as a young rookie, and you seem to be not going after Rene too, but it's kind of telling, what's your perception, Rene, of so-and-so, of what... So what are your thoughts on Dahinden? Like, I mean, he's the one I kind of followed the most as a kid because he was in BC and in Alberta too, and him and John Green. So did you get a chance to obviously meet Dahinden, or did you just kind of not really agree on the subject?
No, yeah, it was a very unfortunate thing. It was another thing, and I guess maybe it was not as tactful as I might have been, especially being a newcomer.
Right.
But I was quite confident in what I was saying, and
yeah.
My first
no problem
public presentation was on the Redwoods video.
Right.
And that actually, my involvement with the Redwoods video actually precipitated my visit to Kranz.
Right.
I was looking for some information about this Anthropoidopes Lloyd let's see, Anthropoidopes loisii, and which was this big monkey in South America.
Okay.
And met Richard Greenwell, and shortly thereafter was invited by Greenwell to accompany him on a documentary to evaluate a piece of video evidence, the Redwoods video down in Northern California. Anyway, so I was presenting that. Well, see, Renee's stance was always, Renee was absolutely, he was chagrined by Roger Patterson.
Oh, okay.
Renee was, he devoted his life to this, and then this rodeo rider from, ne'er-do-well from Yakima grabs the brass ring before Renee can get it.
Right.
And Renee wanted to be in Roger Patterson's position. So that's why he went after the film rights like he did. And then once he had them, anything that detracted from the Patterson-Gimlin film as the centerpiece of photographic evidence, Renee went after like a junkyard dog, and it was fake. It was fake. Whether it was Paul Freeman, or whether it was the Redwoods video, or anything else, and granted, none of those things could even hold a candle to the Patterson-Gimlin film.
Right.
Which is why it was really kind of ridiculous that he would be so antagonistic to any new evidence, because the PG film still was head and shoulders, more than head and shoulders. I mean, it was astronomically
right. To me, it's
greater.
The Patterson film, Skookum cast, footprints evidence. Like, really.
Yeah. So in any case, he did not take my presentation seriously, and went after it, and made all sorts of rude comments when I became a little anatomical, because one of the interesting aspects of the Redwoods video is the creature has a penile display. It has an erection, which looks exactly like a chimpanzee.
Oh. And
you open up one of Jane Goodall's books, the Gombe chimps, and there's picture after picture. Chimps will display a penile erection when they are scared, when they're threatening, when they're anxious, when they're trying to intimidate, but also when they're trying to be submissive. And anyway, but what you see is this rather sickle-shaped, glabrous penis with no glands that doesn't look like a human at all. It looks just like a chimpanzee. I put pictures side by side.
I never even I'll be flat out honest. I never even noticed that looking at the film. I was not looking anywhere in that area. I'm kind of looking at feet.
Exactly. And so when I drew attention to that in a very, very serious, very sober, very professional manner, what does Rene do? He shouts out from the back of the room, what's it doing, trying to FF the effing VW bus, or the van?
No.
And it was just so anyway. But before that had happened, even before that had happened, when I was up at Harrison Hot Springs, that was my debut.
Right.
And Daniel Perez spied me and introduced himself. And as Daniel is prone to do, he likes to be the master of ceremonies. He took me under his wing and he invited me to lunch, very cordially invited me to lunch, and then he wanted to introduce me to a bunch of people, and so he said, have you met Renee yet? And I said, no, I haven't. And he said, well, would you like to? I said, well, of course. So he said, well, I think he's over at his trailer. So we went over to the trailer park, and as we walk up, Renee has a bunch of photos he's spreading out on the picnic table, and he's got a little entourage, as he always does, of his groupies, and he's explaining in this case, not the Redwoods video or anything like that. He was looking at the photos he'd taken at the Blue Mountains of some of Paul Freeman's tracks. It was just one long line of tracks. He's written about it and so forth, anyway, he's showing these. One of the things that he took exception to, there were two things that he always kind of harped on. One was, he said, and people jumped on. He said the tracks were so crazy. It was as if there were two left feet in succession. And I asked him, I pressed him on that. I said, "Did you see two left feet in succession?" Well, no, I'm not really. I said, he says the toes were just sometimes were so you couldn't tell a right from a left. I said, okay, so you couldn't tell a right from a left, but you could, so you don't know if there were two left feet, like it was hopping on a left foot, or that a faker somehow got his feet crossed or got the count wrong. No. He said, no, I just told the one guy, it was Joel Harden was there as the man tracker. And he said, I told him, he said, there could be two left feet. I said, well, it's been misquoted over and over and over again. Well, anyway, then the other thing was, he said that he took exception to what he saw as variation in the angle of the toe row.
Right.
How the toes were disposed across the end of the foot. You can't have it change from step to step. The toes don't shift like that. And that's what he was, at that point, that's what he was pointing out to his entourage. He's laying these tracks out. Well, I'm standing there. We kind of just blended in as we stepped up, Daniel and I'm watching, I'm taking this in. And then unfortunately, I guess, I had the audacity to say, when he was describing this and pointing this out, he had the picture frames, pictures, the photographs lined up, aligned with one another, just straight on in a row, but the tracks, the footprints were not oriented the same. And I said, well, you can't make that comparison unless you line up the sides of the footprint. And I reached down there and I just gently, rotated his photograph, so now the footprints are lined up side by side, and the toes are in perfect alignment.
Right.
He just looked at me, he glared at me, he goes, no. He said, I took a photo, I stepped forward, I took another photo. I said, it doesn't matter how you're holding the camera. I said, what matters is the orientation of the footprint, if you're going to make that comparison. And he goes, that's it. He says, you effing PhDs, I'll never speak to you again. And then, of course, I started getting hate mail from his cronies, from his groupies. I got one that was poison pen letter you wouldn't believe. I mean, I almost was ready to take it to the police because it was so many threats on it, But that was literally the end of it. From then, I just would get stuff sent from him. That was the first time we met, and unfortunately, the last time we spoke.
Oh, that's too bad.
So it was unfortunate, because he's got a treasure trove of historical stuff, but and he's a smart guy.
Yeah.
I really do think that he's a smart guy, and he was very discriminating.
Right.
But he was extremely insecure. Again, it was the same kind of thing. He never cut Grover Krantz any slack. He was always. And Grover made some mistakes,
I like I said, I saw that thing on YouTube that's like an hour and a half long of him just roasting Krantz, and I'm going, oh geez, I didn't know those two hated each other. I never knew that until I saw that.
Oh yeah,
because that happened. that happened a year before I even heard of what Bigfoot was. I was just 6 years old, right? So, but then I stumble upon it and I watch it and I'm just cracking up laughing, because I know Renee's so good at one-liners and stuff, and I'm going, oh man. And then you pop in near the end and I'm going, oh man, that's Dr. Meldrum when he was a young rookie. Oh my goodness. And so I'm
I'll have to see if I can find it.
I can send it to you. I can send it to you.
Oh, do. Please do.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Meldrum, I appreciate you taking so much of your time today to talk to me. This has just been absolutely phenomenal. We'll keep in touch. I mean, to talk to you is a great pleasure and honor, because, like I said, I've followed your work for many years, and you seem to be, I kind of call Krantz's replacement, high up there. So, but I really appreciate you talking to me and doing this interview, and we will keep in touch, and I will send you that video, and as well as the tracks that I found, or track that I supposedly think could be a Sasquatch track found in just outside of Valemount, BC.
Okay, very good.
Okay, thank you very much. You have a great day.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.